While on the lam for 2.5 years, a Japanese man wanted for the murder of a British woman says he scissored off his lower lip, dug 2 moles out of his cheek with a box cutter and gave himself a nose job in an attempt to obscure his identity. The disclosures come in a book released and written from jail by Tatsuya Ichihashi, who murdered and raped his English teacher, Lindsay Hawker. 22-year-old Lindsay Hawker was born in Coventry, England. She graduated with first-class honor in biology from the University of Leeds. She had plans to continue with her master's, but first, she wanted to explore the world. Like many others, she decided to work as an English teacher in Japan for a year. Hawker was found dead in a sand-filled bathtub on the balcony of Ichihashi's apartment in Chiba, east of Tokyo, in March 2007. Ichihashi, arrested in 2009 after a lengthy nationwide manhunt, admits to taking Hawker's life in the book until the arrest. But he doesn't describe the crime or his motives, instead detailing his life at large, during which he traveled up and down the country, in constant fear of arrest and obsessed with cosmetic surgery. Born in 1979, Tatsuya Ichihashi was born with a good familial background, his father being a doctor and his mother being a dentist. Even though Tatsuya graduated from the University of Chiba in 2005, he decided to live off his parents, where he reportedly received an approximate allowance of 100,000 yen monthly. Tatsuya did not have any criminal priors, but allegedly he did rob and assaulted a man, but that case was settled with a little hush money from his parents. Tatsuya was known to be a loner. He did have great physical stamina as he loved his workouts and cycled 25 kilometers daily. On March 20, 2007, Lindsay Hawker was on her way home after her English teaching job at Nova School. She met 28-year-old Tatsuya Ichihashi, who claimed that he was one of her students, but she denied it. She tried to cycle away, but Tatsuya was persistent. Athletically fit, he ran after her to her apartment. Out of breath, he asked if he could get a glass of water. Since this stranger now knows where she lived, she believed it was best to let Tatsuya in her apartment and made sure to introduce him to her housemates. It was a precautionary step to let Tatsuya know that she did not live alone. When he was inside, he proposed that Lindsay could teach him English. The lesson will be for $42 per hour, a much higher rate than average. Lindsay agreed with the condition that the lesson would be conducted in a public place. Lindsay's workplace, Nova School, does allow their teachers to hold their own private teaching sessions as long as the teachers report back the necessary details. Before Tatsuya left, he did a quick sketch of Lindsay and left his details, including his name, telephone number, and email address. 4 days later, they met in a cafe. At the end of the lesson, Tatsuya said he left his wallet back at his apartment. Again, Lindsay took precautionary steps by asking the taxi to wait for her, and she would be right down to head to another place. Unfortunately, after 7 minutes of waiting, the taxi driver left to accept another call. The next day, Lindsay's housemates reported her missing. So did Lindsay's workplace when Lindsay failed to show up for 2 of her classes consecutively. Lindsay's parents, back in UK, 8 hours behind Japan's time zone, were worried when their daughter, who regularly checked in, failed to check in after an earthquake in Japan that day. With Tatsuya's information left behind in Lindsay's apartment, the police headed over to his apartment complex to investigate. However, Japanese law forbids law enforcement to knock on Tatsuya's apartment without a proper cause. Tatsuya fled as soon as he noticed the police's presence. With 9 police officers scattered around the apartment complex without radio communication and Tatsuya's agility, he managed to escape barefooted. The policeman did manage to snatch his rucksack that contained workout clothing. Inside Tatsuya's apartment, police found Lindsay's items scattered on the floor. On his balcony, they found a hand sticking out of a pile of soil in a bathtub. That night, Tatsuya's neighbor heard a strange metal sound dragging across the floor. It was assumed that was the time Tatsuya moved his bathtub to the balcony. The hand belonged to Lindsay. Her long brown hair was shaved off. Her badly bruised and bound body was buried under a mixture of sand and soil, where Tatsuya got the material from 6 different hardware stores. It was said he either planned to wait for the body to decompose or to bury the body under cement. The autopsy showed that Lindsay was beaten, raped, and strangulated for at least 3 minutes to death. When the evidence were presented in the trial later, Lindsay's father, Bill Hawker, said, "The worst part was when they said Lindsay wet herself. She must have been absolutely petrified to do that. It made me feel physically sick to hear. Lindsay's parents flew all the way from UK to assist in any way they could to seek justice for their daughter. They spared no expense to assist in the search, flying multiple times to Japan to plead the public for help. The reward for information went up to 10 million yen. Police released pictures of Tatsuya, including a picture of him disguised as a woman, and even printed full-sized cardboard of him. Police raided love hotels nearby, as love hotels are a good spot to hide as they are usually without or with little surveillance. All of Tatsuya's sightings were fruitless. Unknowns to the police at this point, Tatsuya was hiding in one of the many islands of Japan, surviving off fishes and wildlife he caught. He never stayed too long at one same place. To prevent the public from identifying him, he attempted to perform plastic surgery on himself. He cut off the moles on his face and snipped his lips. But his self-performing surgery wasn't enough. He wanted a more drastic appearance change. He then started patronizing clinics to perform plastic surgeries on him, including a nose lift. This was a trap that he dug for himself, for that was how the police were finally able to track him. Many of the clinics performing these cosmetic surgeries would take a before and after picture for reference. It was when Tatsuya submitted his before picture, the clinic realized that they had a suspected fugitive present. Along with this, another tip soon came in from Tatsuya's co-worker from a construction company. Tatsuya's fingerprint was taken from his dorm, confirming his identity and current known location. After 32 months of eluding the police, Tatsuya was finally arrested on a ferry terminal where he was bound for an island in Okinawa. Initially, Tatsuya was only charged for abandoning a body. For 23 days, the maximum allowed days of questioning, he refused to confess to murdering Lindsay. When he finally confessed, he said it was an accident. He did punch, bound, and rape Lindsay. His choking went too far, as he only wanted to prevent Lindsay from screaming during her rape. He attempted to resuscitate her but failed. After 4.5 years, justice was served. Tatsuya Ichihashi was sentenced to life in prison. He was only spared from the death penalty as he was only 32 years old at that time, and he had no criminal priors and could possibly be rehabilitated. There is a possibility that Tatsuya might be released after serving 10 years with his entitlement to parole if he meets the conditions required. When the verdict was finally released, Lindsay's father, Bill, thanked all those who helped out in the investigation. He added, Lindsay, came here, she loved the children of Japan. I now feel as if Japan has not let her down. In 2013, Tatsuya released a book titled Taito Sararumade, Kohaku no Nainen Nanakajetsu no Kuroku, Until the Arrest, the blank 2 years and 7 months, where he recounted the times he was eluding the police. He offered the royalties to Lindsay's family, and understandably so, they refused. In February 2004, Carlie Brucia was kidnapped from a Florida car wash a mile from her house, and found dead just a few days later in a field behind a church. On the evening of February 1, 2004, an 11-year-old girl named Carlie Brucia was abducted in Sarasota, Florida while walking 1 mile from her friend's house to her own home. She was found dead in a field by a church 5 days later in a crime that sent shockwaves throughout her community. Carlie Brucia was just 11 years old when she was abducted and murdered in her own hometown. Carlie Jane Brucia was born on March 16, 1992. By 1993, her mother and father had divorced, with Brucia visiting her Long Island family during the summer and winter school breaks. Brucia was living with her mother Susan Shorpen and her stepfather in Sarasota when the unthinkable happened on that February evening. Brucia had been sleeping over at a friend's house and was headed home to watch the Super Bowl that evening. It was around 6:15 p.m. when she began her 1-mile walk back to her house. Her friend's mother, Connie Arnold, had called Brucia's mother to check that it was okay for her to walk, and Shorpen replied that she did not want Brucia walking along the busy Bee Ridge Road. She consequently sent her husband to pick her up, but he never found her. Brucia's parents called 911 around 7:30 p.m., and police initiated a large-scale search for Brucia as the unbearable hours ticked by. Then around midday the following day, police bloodhounds tracking Brucia's scent came upon Evie's car wash at 4735 Bee Ridge Road. The dogs tracked the scent behind the car wash before it suddenly vanished.
Footage taken from the car wash's motion sensor cameras showed a man in a mechanic's uniform leading Brucia by the arm at 6:21 p.m. the previous evening.
Police rewound the tape and saw a yellow Buick driving into the parking lot 3 minutes before her recorded abduction. The footage was immediately released to the media and an Amber Alert was issued for Brucia, but it would be to no avail. Though Brucia's abductor was quickly identified from the footage as a local mechanic named Joseph Peter Smith, it was already too late for Brucia. Police eventually received Smith's address, and authorities learned that the suspect was actually on parole for drug offenses. The previous year, Smith had violated parole twice, but authorities decided not to remand him.
Police searched Smith's rented room and found mechanic uniforms in his closet, but no other evidence tying him to Brucia.
When officers found drug paraphernalia in his car, Smith was taken into custody for a parole violation. Joseph Smith's brother, John, was then shown the CCTV footage and he agreed to help the FBI to get a confession from him. "If it's him," John cautioned, "you won't get it out of him." And yet on February 5, Smith called his brother John, who was then able to take FBI agents and a local officer to the Central Church of Christ, and directed them to a nearby field 2.8 miles from the site of Brucia's abduction. While at the church, John received another call from his brother, who described the location of Brucia's body. In a field behind the church, 11-year-old Carlie Brucia was found lying on her back, a deep ligature mark prominent on her neck. She was naked below the waist, apart from a sock on her right foot, with her right leg outstretched and her left leg curled underneath her. During that phone call, Smith had admitted that he had rough sex with Brucia before strangling her. The Sarasota County Medical Examiner determined that Carlie Brucia had been strangled from behind, and abrasions on the side of her body indicated that she had been dragged to her final resting place. A semen sample found on her shirt matched Joseph Smith's DNA profile, and 2 of Brucia's head hairs were recovered from the yellow station wagon he had borrowed, with 7 fibers matching the red shirt that Brucia was wearing. Smith had disposed of Brucia's backpack and clothing in different trash bins.
All of this evidence was enough to charge Smith with Brucia's abduction and murder. Convicted on all charges, Smith was sentenced to death on March 15, 2006.
In 2018, Smith's sentence was commuted to life, but then it was reinstated to a death sentence in April 2020. However, Smith died on death row of unknown circumstances on July 26, 2021, according to the Herald Tribune. The police have also suspected Smith in the unsolved murder of Tara Riley, whose naked body was found in a retention pond behind a Walmart in Bradenton, Florida, in 2000. Brucia's horrifying death did incite legal action, however. In 2004, a bill named Carlie's Law was proposed, which amended existing laws to toughen parole rules for sex offenders. The bill, however, failed to pass Congress and appears to have been abandoned. Tragedy followed Brucia's family. In July 2005, Brucia's mother lost custody of her 7-year-old son after she failed a drug test, according to the Tampa Bay Times. At the time, Shorpen said she had turned to drugs because the pain within my reality is too much to bear. Sadly, she died of a heroin overdose in April 2017. After 3 decades without answers, police identified the suspect in the murder of 19-year-old Cathy Swarts. Through extensive investigation, it was found that Swarts put up a valiant fight against her attacker on December 2, 1988, according to Three Rivers Police Department. However, Swarts died of multiple stab wounds, a vicious beating, and strangulation, all while her 9-month-old daughter Courtney was in the next room. Michigan State Police crime scene technicians found fingerprints, blood, and a footprint at the crime scene, according to the department. Officers also interviewed thousands of people as well as collected fingerprints and footprints, but did not find a match. By the 2000s, DNA technology allowed officers to enter the DNA profile into CODIS, a combined DNA index system, but years continued to go by without a match. In 2022, Three Rivers Police Department and Michigan State Police utilized forensic genetic genealogy, which narrowed the suspect pool to a single family. Forensic genealogy isolated it to 4 people, Michigan State Police Detective First Lieutenant Chuck Christensen said. When we get to that point, then it's up to us to get additional samples from individuals that have been identified to determine if that person is in fact the contributor to that DNA. Christensen said the 4 suspects were all brothers. There was an idea in the investigators' minds of who the likely suspect would have been based on history of each of the brothers. After interviews, fingerprinting, and DNA testing, officers said they identified the murder suspect as 53-year-old Robert Waters. Officers traveled to South Carolina to interview Waters, and gathered enough probable cause to arrest Waters for open murder, according to the department. I think he had an idea at some point police would arrive and want to talk to him, and it's hard to say what would be going through your mind after 35 years, Christensen said. Waters was taken into custody Sunday in Beaufort, South Carolina, according to the St. Joseph County Office of the Prosecuting Attorney. Under Sheriff Jason Bingaman is working on arrangements to transfer Waters back to the county. While nothing can replace the loss of Cathy Swarts and the impact this senseless tragedy has had, we hope the identification and arrest of a suspect will bring some long-awaited closure to her family and friends, department officials said. Along with Michigan State Police, students at Western Michigan University's Cold Case Project helped in solving the 3 decades-long murder by scanning and organizing nearly 10,000 documents. Really, we knew this case was kind of coming to a close, so we started doing timelines and a list of people and kind of filling in the blanks they didn't really have, said Rachel Moore, rising WMU senior and member of the Cold Case program. I think the detectives kind of had an idea, but they wouldn't really say who. We kind of had an idea, so we didn't go too much into finding other suspects, but really just kind of finding things about this certain person that would just be 100% this is the guy. Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten, WMU Cold Case Project Director, beamed with pride as she talked about her students' work. This one in particular, this entire room that we are in was filled with piles and piles of material from the case file. They categorized it and knew this case like the back of their hand, she said. I really hope that this knowledge of Cathy's case helps give her family members, particularly her daughter who was present when the murder took place, I hope it gives young Courtney peace. Just peace. In 2021, WMU students teamed up with Michigan State Police to try to solve cold case homicides. Notably, the university program helped solve the 1987 Niles murder of Roxanne Woods. Patrick Gillum, 67, was a free man for 35 years before DNA evidence connected him. Fawn Cox was a well-liked 16-year-old high school student whose death shocked her family. She was found dead in her bedroom on July 21, 1989, raped and strangled. After years of being unable to find her killer, and unable to pay to set up a database for advanced DNA techniques, the Kansas City Police Department worked with a local FBI office to discover the girl's killer 31 years after the murder was committed. Fawn Marie Cox was a junior at Northeast High School and a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park. The paper reported that she was not a drug user and attended Sheffield Assembly of God Church. According to reports, Cox worked her job at Worlds of Fun until 11 p.m., went home and went to bed because she had to work the next day. That night, Cox's sister, Felisa, said the family dog seemed agitated, but blamed that on the dog's pregnancy. As air conditioner units cooled the summer air, someone snuck through a window into Cox's room, raped and strangled her. The nature of the crime later led Kansas City Police Department Sergeant Ben Caldwell to believe that the suspect knew Fawn because he chose a specific window and went in and out undetected. Felisa was with her mother, Beverly Cox, when they found Fawn. In the morning, she said she heard her older sister's alarm go off. I went over to shake her, come on. Get up. But she had been gone for a while. The Manhattan Mercury reported in 1989 that the police said they had no suspects at the time. However, DNA was collected from the scene. In 2000, the family donated $3,000 in hopes that a reward would lead to the discovery of Cox's killer. Money does do a lot of talking on the streets. That's what we're hoping and praying for, Beverly Cox said. Police had not given up on the case, having arrested a neighbor and 3 suspects who were charged in connection with Fawn's death. However, those charges were dropped when the DNA did not provide conclusive matches. Instead, police theorized that her death was part of a botched robbery. Amber Gonzalez, Cox's sister, told Fox 4 that she was traumatized by the case and ended up in the hospital because she became so obsessed and overwhelmed by it. I looked up to her so much, she said, now 45. I wanted to be just like her. She was my protector. In 2000, Kansas City Police Detective Jay Thompson said, newer forensic science might help. However, the family fought for years to have DNA evidence from the scene tested. Advanced testing costs were described as prohibitive by the KCPD, who said testing was too expensive. At one point, Caldwell told the Kansas City Star, "Whoever killed her either has never been charged with a felony or is no longer alive. People don't start killing and then quit and stay out of trouble as if they fell off the face of the earth." Caldwell would turn out to be right. In 2019, Caldwell started to collect money to establish a genealogy program. "It would take hopefully volunteers from the community, if we could establish a fund like that," he said. "Right now, we're working to try and get the money, and we could see kind of a pilot program where we could gain additional money and sustain it." In March, they worked with the FBI to secure funding and eventually discovered that the blood and semen evidence left at the scene belonged to Cox's cousin, Fox 4 reported, who was 21 at the time of the murder, died in 2006. Her cousin, Donald Cox Jr., died from a drug overdose. Felicia Cox said, "It's a relief there's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure." Gonzalez added that she was surprised that the person who killed her sister was a relative, but the news has brought closure. "I don't know how to explain it. It's the happiest moment. I can't be nothing but happy. This is what I've been praying for my family," she said. On October 9, 1988, Gayle Barrus was spotted leaving a coffee shop in the early hours of the morning, accompanied by a man. This was the last time Barrus was ever seen alive. She was a 30-year-old single mother of 3 from Michigan. Life was hard and she worked at 2 different local bars to be able to survive and take care of her 3 children. In the early hours of October 9, 1988, between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., Barrus was spotted leaving Speed's coffee shop in Battle Creek, Michigan. She was accompanied by a dark-haired man, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. On October 25, hunters from Emmett and nearby town made a horrifying discovery. They found a lifeless body of a woman lying on River Road. The authorities quickly identified the body to be that of Gayle Barrus, and an extensive investigation followed. Witnesses were identified and interviewed, and evidence was collected from the crime scene. On October 22, just a few days before Barrus's body was discovered and almost 2 weeks after her disappearance, a 24-year-old man named Roger Plato was approached by authorities. Plato's car matched the description from a victim of a different abduction and assault case. At 4:30 p.m., authorities attempted to detain him at gunpoint while he was walking to his car at a parking lot in Bellevue. Plato became aggressive, refused to cooperate, and started fighting back. He was shot when he tried to wrestle the gun from a detective and as a result died from the injuries. He was never interviewed. Authorities performed an autopsy and a blood sample was taken before the body was cremated, which was stored at a private lab at the time. Investigators of Barrister's case turned their attention to Plato's friend and former roommate, Richard Compton. Compton had a vast criminal career, but when approached by investigators, he backed off and denied knowing anything. With no further leads or developments, Barrus's case eventually went cold. In 2018, Battle Creek cold case detective Scott Marshall reopened the case. One of his first discoveries was that Compton's DNA had never been tested, so made Compton his #1 suspect. After some investigation, Detective Marshall discovered that Compton had died in 2009 and his body was buried in the County International Cemetery in Austin, Texas. Compton was just 59 years old when he died. Detective Marshall got a search warrant and traveled to Texas to exhume Compton's body. After examination, it was discovered that Compton's DNA samples didn't match that found in Barrus's body, but matched previously unidentified hairs connected to the crime scene. In November 2020, a break in the case emerged almost by luck. Sergeant Chris Spastic of the Callahan County Sheriff's Department was taking an inventory of evidence at the department and found a vial containing the blood sample taken from Plato. On January 30, 2021, it was announced that a state police lab connected the blood to DNA found on Gayle Barrus's body, confirming Plato as responsible for assaulting her and taking her life. It's almost likely that Compton witnessed that happening. Both men have already died and they never had to pay for this horrible crime. However, the Barrus family has expressed their relief on finally being able to have some kind of closure. Detective Marshall said DNA technology is the future for solving cold cases. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and click the bell icon to stay tuned.